So as you may or may not know, I was able to meet up recently with fellow architectural photographer Adam Taylor, where, as I promised over social media, the two of us would sit down for a video and answer a lot of business-related questions that you all submitted over, whether it was some of the comments in the past videos, or actually we got a lot over social media. Unfortunately though, the only way I was able to do this was to pack my bags and travel all the way to Oahu, Hawaii. Whatever keeps the subscribers happy, I'll do whatever I can, I guess. I'll keep this introduction short. We were able to sit down and answer a lot of the questions, a lot of back and forth between Adam and I, and our whole time, I think by the time I edit everything down, it's going to be an hour video, but as you can see, it's not an hour. So what I decided to do was take our entire conversation and chop it up into 3 separate videos. So what you're about to see is part 1 of us answering the questions that you all submitted concerning the business side of architecture photography. And I would be remiss if I didn't also mention a lot of the resources that both Adam and myself have put out there for other architectural photographers. Adam is doing a fantastic job at workshops and other things that he provides on his website, which I'll link to all that. I'll put the link in the description below. And as you may or may not know, Mike Kelly and myself put together a whole entire course, a whole entire video series related to the business side of architecture photography. We discuss things over sales and marketing. We break down and clearly explain aspects of contracts, copyright infringements, how to build your website, licensing, the list goes on. You can find that within the store at aapalmanac.com, and I will link to that as well. So without further ado, let's get to part 1 of Adam Taylor and myself answering the business-related questions that you guys submitted. Some of them too, we're gonna kind of combine because a lot of the questions were very similar, or some of them were similar to each other. So I figure we'll jump right into it. So this first one's concerning contracts. This one was sent to me over a DM over Instagram and said, "Hey Matthew, I know some photographers don't like contracts because they don't want to be a hassle, especially new clients that may be unfamiliar with AP contracts. I see contracts as a big positive, but not sure how to introduce contracts to clients. What's your strategy to seamlessly introduce the contract for new clients?" I have my thoughts on this, but I'm curious what your...
Well, first thing that comes to mind to answer the question as direct as possible, don't complicate things. If they're a new client, they're not used to your way of doing anything or not. If it's a new client, it should be easier than an old client. One tip that I like is to call it an agreement, not a contract. So send it over and say, great, now that we're ready to schedule a shoot, here's the agreement, please review it, sign it, etc. But yeah, it seems like it shouldn't be that complicated.
Yeah, especially when the question was, how do you introduce it to new clients?
Yep.
It's new to everybody. So if there's really, you don't have to introduce anything to a new client. You just say you make it sound like that's your normal way of doing business.
Yeah, another thing I will say is that when you have the conversations leading up to the point that you send them the agreement or contract, mention that it's going to be there. So it shouldn't be a surprise to them at that point. You've probably talked to them over the phone, maybe you've had an in-person meeting, perhaps you've emailed them back and forth, and at some point throughout that process, you should mention, once we're ready to book the shoot and secure the date, I will send over an agreement for you to review and sign, whether that includes a deposit invoice to hold the date or something like that. Don't shy away from these things. Don't hide the fact that it's going to be there leading up to it.
Yeah, and I think if anything too, contracts make you look that much more professional. And so if your clients maybe aren't necessarily used to it, I take that as an advantage. You're gonna look that much more professional than some of the other, maybe your competition in your area who doesn't. So I don't really ever see it as a downside. I cannot stand, it's an inconvenient argument. I can't stand it.
The other thing is...
Try buying a house, that's inconvenient, but you still gotta do it.
The clients that you're working with, there's a real good chance they have a contract in place with their client. If it's an interior designer or an architect or a custom home builder, I guarantee you they have some sort of agreement with the party that hired them to do the work that you're photographing. So it's not like they're not used to contracts or agreements.
Let's go on to the second one. Second question is, how do you handle prospects and potential clients justifying exposure as a good enough reason to do a job for free or practically next to nothing?
You don't justify that. That's not justifiable.
All right, moving on, question 3.
That is not justifiable. I have a lot of thoughts about doing work for free. I'm okay doing free work if you're not doing free work for somebody that you want to hire you. So let me explain how that might look. I'll give you a scenario. Scenario one is what I don't like, which is, hey architect, I would like for you to hire me. So in order to do that, let me do this for free so you can see how good I am. Then the next time you'll hire me. That doesn't seem to pan out. They don't think you're valuable, and you've already proven to them that you're not valuable because you've done it for free. They're very rarely, if ever, going to come back and actually hire you after you do free work for them, or even discounts. I've given a discount to a first-time client and never heard from them again. I don't think it works out well. The way that I would recommend doing free work is essentially going to somebody that's not the potential client and asking to use the space to build portfolio and content material, and in exchange, give them some photos. So what does that look like? If you want to work for an architect, reach out to a realtor who's selling a home that's designed by that architect, for example, or not by the architect. Let's just take the architect out of it. Realtor is selling a home. You don't want to work for that realtor. You want to work for architects and designers. Email the realtor and say, hey, can I have access to this property that you're listing for a couple hours or the day, whatever, so that I can build portfolio material. In exchange, I'll give you some of the photos I create. With that said, you don't have to give them everything. If you make 5 photos and you want to give them all 5, great. If you end up with 15 photos that day and you want to give them 5, cool, you haven't promised anything at that point. Now you're not shooting yourself in the foot when it comes to reaching out to an architect. You've built your portfolio, you can show the architect what you're capable of, and you were able to do it on your terms without any pressure from any kind of client. You're not guaranteeing the realtor anything, you're not pressured to perform in front of a client that you really want to impress or anything like that. So I think everybody wins.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a win-win for everybody. I would say too, if you just want to keep it simple, you can tell people that I just don't operate my business that way. You know, if they're saying, hey, would you be willing to do something for exposure? If you're, my goodness, even 2 years into this, you really don't, hopefully you don't need exposure as a form of payment. But I think you could just, again, act professional and just say, I appreciate it, but I can't operate my business that way.
I've also heard somebody else, I can't remember where I heard this, they said something to the effect of, okay, let's quantify that. So if you want to offer me exposure, like how many clicks, how many likes, how many new leads are you going to give me? Like quantify the exposure they're going to give you.
Yeah.
And say, okay, well, normally I would charge $3,000 for this shoot. What kind of $3,000 exposure are you going to give me? And then they're going to be like, yeah, I don't really know.
We were going to mention you on Instagram.
Yeah. Well, for a mention on Instagram, like that's not really worth $3,000. So how, kind of put the ball in their court and let them come to the conclusion that, hey, it's not really worth it.
It's a good point. At the very least, let them know what you would charge for it and try to come up with something to make up for that. Good point.
Yep.
All right, cool. Let's go on to the third one. I thought this was interesting. This has to do with information you put on your website. What are your thoughts on posting rates on your website? Do you think it helps or hurts a photographer?
Depends on what photographer. For a real estate photographer, it makes total sense because it's more or less a commodity type of product. For architecture and design, more of the creative side of the photography business, does not make sense at all. You're shooting yourself in the foot. Every client and project can and will be different. Even if you have a base price that your shoots start at, or kind of your starting point of how you bill out your jobs, if a client sees your base and they're a bigger client that you're gonna give a bigger price to, it just doesn't make sense. I don't think it's gonna help you at all.
I'm kind of in the same ballpark with you. I think if you're in real estate, great, because unfortunately I think a lot of your clients in real estate, obviously the agents and realtors, a majority of them quantify a potential or photographer based on price. If that's usually the first thing they'll ask. When I was shooting real estate, they would say, so I would get introduced to somebody, oh, hey, Matt's a real estate photographer. Question number one, what do you charge?
Absolutely.
Without even seeing a single one of your images.
Yep.
You could be the best photographer in the world, you could be the worst. That's their first question they ask, what are your rates?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think if you are shooting for more designers, architects, things like that, I think what draws them in should be your quality of work, and then bring up the price, and hopefully at that point, they can connect the dots and go, okay, I see why Adam charges so much because his photos look fantastic. So,
the other thing is that if you put a price on your website, it's one reason for them not to email you or call you.
True.
They've already got some information. If they need information, they have a reason to reach out to you. So if you can get them on the phone or get their attention through an email, then hopefully you can hold them, explain your process, which helps justify your pricing, and now you've built a bit more of a rapport with them as well.
Yeah, I think too when they ask, does it help or hurt a photographer? I think it helps in the way, no matter what line of photography you're in, if you do post your rates and you're getting leads over your website, at the very least they've seen my rates. So they're still willing to, you can kind of filter that out. I mean, it's kind of a give and take a little bit, but yeah, I would say, I don't necessarily post my rates because the types of clients are all over the place. What I'm gonna charge some maybe world-renowned architecture firm is not gonna be the same. I'm gonna charge little independent designer who's a one-person operation. You don't want to win or lose business. I think in general it might hurt somebody, but there's some positives to it. I'm assuming you don't. You don't post your rate. Yeah. All right. Which kind of leads into question number 4. Adam, what is your process for raising rates?
The process is I update my standard rate sheet, and the next time somebody asks, if you have a rate sheet, I send them the new rate sheet.
Yeah.
And the next time a client asks me about doing a job and I need to send them a proposal or a quote or an estimate, I have the new rate on there. I've only encountered this situation one time where I felt the need to let people know that I'm raising my rates. I had only a couple clients after I moved to a new market. I had a couple clients that I felt, hey, they should probably know that next year I'm raising my rates. I sent them an email, let them know that it's raising this much per creative fee. The licensing fee was staying the same. The creative fee was going to be raised a little bit. And I said, if you would like to book a shoot now, I can lock you in at this rate for the next month until January. And then, if we shoot in January or February, then you'll still have that creative fee. You've already had to pay the deposit. So I gave them kind of one last chance to, get that previous price that they were used to. But there was no issues. Again, don't overcomplicate things. Don't make it a big deal. Nobody lets you know when the cost of almond milk is raising or the gas prices are raising. You show up, that's what it costs, that's what you pay.
Yeah, and I think I wanted to touch on this because do you think, and obviously it is in my opinion, I think it's a bigger deal to the photographer to raise rates than it is to everybody else.
Could be.
Especially over the past 2 years.
Yeah.
2 or 3 years. I think some photographers just live in fear, like, oh my God, I'm gonna raise my rates, and they're afraid of losing business, which you're going to, honestly, especially in real estate. I found this a lot in real estate. I kid you not, I think I even told you, at one point, the first time I ever raised my prices was literally $10 more, and I lost roughly 8 to 10% of my clients. But then I gained other ones, so.
The gaining other ones, let me touch on that, because if you're raising your prices, in my mind it says, I've gotten more equipment, I've gotten better, my results have gotten better, I've elevated myself. So maybe it's time that you weed out some of the clients that are strictly focused on lower price points. Mm-hmm. Hopefully they've grown with you also, and they're willing to level up with you. There might be some that aren't willing to make that jump with you. Say goodbye to them, pick up the next ones, because there are also clients out there that if you're too low, they're not gonna hire you because they assume you're not qualified to meet their standards.
Well, I think if you're too low, it's going to kind of discredit you as a smart business person. I mean, if you have the most amazing portfolio and you say, yeah, I charge $200 to shoot a house, I think that's going to raise an eyebrow to your potential clients, and they're going to go, what is wrong here? Yeah. So I think it's going to throw a red flag. So for my take, I don't necessarily broadcast out that I'm changing rates. I just kind of do it. And so, I mean, if a client's going to see from year to year, sometimes it's literally 5% difference. So for them to see, oh, Matthew charged this in 2022 and he charged this 2 years ago in 2020. I mean, if they're going to raise a stink over that, over maybe 5 to 10% difference, something's wrong with them.
Another way to help wrap your mind around this, you're pricing creative services. So because it's not a, item that is based off of your time or whatever, it makes sense that as you grow,
you get better.
You're going to get better.
Yeah.
Things will change. You're also basing your prices off of value. So the more value you provide to people, the more it is worth, the more they should pay. So think about those things. again, it's not about the process. It's about your thought process of why are you struggling to do this.
Let's go on. Next question. Question more about equipment and gear. I'm assuming based on the question, it says, what is worth spending good money on as a new A&D photographer? Whether it is gear, digital services, marketing, or anything else. In particular, where should someone start, just starting in the A&D photography, focus spending their money on? And on the flip side, let's do that first. So this is a two-sided question. So let's go on the first side. Getting into A&D for the first time. Where do you put your time, resources, money, focus, things like that?
I feel like
answer this in 2 sentences.
I feel like this is a great time to list some plugs and say, get some one-on-one mentoring with a great photographer. No.
I was going to answer this, and I was going to hype something that you did for me, and I mean, you'll know what I'm talking about.
Okay. Yeah, it's a good question, and I think it's going to differ for everybody. If you don't have a good business sense, then maybe you need to get some mentoring so that somebody can help you navigate that. If you're shooting with, an outdated camera that isn't, allowing your skills to show through, then maybe it's equipment. So I don't think it can be a blanket answer. I think the question needs to be reframed in terms of not what do I spend my money on, but what do I focus my energy on, and that's your weakness. Find your weakness and fill in the gaps there. And it might not be like, hey, this is my weak point, so let me attack that first, because maybe there's some other low-hanging fruit that if you attack the low-hanging fruit first, then it kind of buys you time to work on the other thing.
Yeah, I would say, I know a lot of photographers, they're going to want to know about equipment. I'd say, aside from a good camera, your next, your sharp, what's the saying? Your photos are only as sharp as your tripod or something like that. I'm screwing something up.
I've heard the best camera is the one you have with you. I've heard
yeah,
that.
There's that.
But
your lens is only as sharp as good tripod or so. Anyway, good tripod. It's a necessity. Definitely don't drop just 50 or 60 bucks on an Amazon tripod. Spend good money on, because it should be a piece of equipment that you're going to use on every single shoot, and you're going to beat it to death. You're going to put it through its paces. So definitely invest a good chunk of change in that.
I'm going to interject here. I went a very long time with a very poor tripod and tripod head. Again, my thought process on equipment is when my skills and experience are here and my equipment's here, then I need to raise my equipment. And then I raise my equipment, and then I start building my skills back up. But at a certain point, it's like the equipment's not really going to make you better. Like, you just need to get better.
No.
And so, again, I went a long time with a pretty terrible tripod and head. Went a long time without a Cam Ranger. I was able to do a lot of stuff with very minimal gear. But again, it's like, what do you actually need?
Big thing that I'm going to plug on Adam that he helped me with was your marketing portfolio book. If people ever ask for a business card, and then you can pull out a nice glossy, or however you want to, a portfolio book to hand them, you are making like the best impression you ever can with a potential client. Because I reached out to Adam to help me out, because you were saying you could help photographers out with putting together a nice portfolio book. And I know nothing about graphic design, so I had Adam put it together, and I think I printed off like roughly 20 or 25. And when I had a potential client say, hey, do you have a business card on you? When I could hand off one of those, it was like, oh, I mean, you look 10 times more amazing than any photographer who just, even if they hand them a nice business card, you hand that to them with your contact info on the first or page or whatever. I mean, there's something wrong with them if they don't call you back.
Yeah.
They might not call you back because they might think you're too expensive, which great, that's a fantastic problem to have. But
yeah, I'd like to kind of elaborate on this book thing. So when I made my first portfolio book, the level of confidence and professionalism that I internally felt when I walked into my first client meeting and handed them that was astronomical. It was like, I mean, I went from here to here, and it was a switch that flipped. In terms of how people perceive you, I actually had somebody at a tile company that is used to printing books and stuff. He asked me, like, what did you pay, like 10 grand to get these printed? Like, because he's printed large runs of printed material. He knows that print collateral is expensive.
Sure.
So let me break it down for you guys. And I'm not doing this to plug stuff, because I've helped Matthew and other photographers with their books. I have a workshop on teaching how to make these books, and I give InDesign templates and stuff so you can do it on your own. But financially, I think it's one of the best like bang for your buck
Definitely.
marketing expenses, because you already have the images. If you know how to use InDesign, or if you pay $50 to take my workshop and get the templates and learn how to do it, you can get 20 books printed for less than $200 shipped to your door. That's less than $10 per book. And all it takes is one person to open that book and hire you, and you've 10x your investment.
Okay, so on the flip side of this question is, what are some traps and where should one avoid wasting money?
That's interesting.
I think the first thing for me is cheap equipment. If you get what you pay for. Hopefully, as a professional photographer, you apply that to your line of work. Same goes for equipment. If it's cheap, there's a reason for it. I'll give you a case in point. The first time I was needing something like a Cam Ranger. There were knockoff versions of it, and that were like almost half. And I bought one of those. It was, I don't know, like a Red Eye. I can't remember what the actual name was. And it was terrible. It was a piece of junk. And I didn't want to fork over at the time, $350. Maybe that's roughly what they are now. And then inevitably, I had to pay for a Cam Ranger anyway. So I should have bought it in the first place. So again, going back to equipment, you don't have to buy a $5,000 tripod kit and head, but get a good one. Don't buy cheap versions of your equipment, just like the same with a cheap camera. A cheap camera is gonna bite you in the butt at one point in time. So if it looks too good to be true, yeah, it probably is.
I think that's a good answer, yeah. Other things that I can think of, nothing comes to mind really in terms of traps. Again, it's just a matter of, do you need it,
Yeah.
Because you can go a long way without really spending much of any money. So it's less of where should I not spend money and more of where should I focus my energy and attention and progressing.
Yeah, and don't buy equipment just because you saw another photographer use a piece of equipment. I fell into that trap too when I watched some of like Mike Kelly's tutorials. He'd open these crates of like all this equipment and stuff, and some of it is trial and error, but I would buy things going, oh, I'll do that, and I used it on one shoot and I never used it again.
Trial and error. That's a really good point to add into this conversation, because you don't know what you need or don't need until you get in that situation. And the only way to do that is through experience and trial and error. So you might see Matthew or myself or anybody else ranting and raving about one particular piece of equipment that we just can't live without, and it might not be the best for your situation. So get out there and do as many practice shoots or paid shoots if you can. But as a new photographer, get out there and practice a bunch and encounter the problems that you're going to encounter when you get paid. That way you know what hurdles you're going to have to face, and you can allocate money towards overcoming those hurdles.
Good point.